Hello, and welcome to another edition of Hypnosis Helps with me, Neil Myers, hypnosis practitioner, and my colleague Bill Miller, another hypnosis practitioner. Welcome back. And in this edition of Hypnosis Helps, we're going to pick up from where we were before, with a little reminder of where we got there. Last time we were talking about hypnosis and weight management, dieting, and things like that, and we're going to pick that up again.
Right. Yep. So last time, just to recap a little bit, last time we talked about, what's a healthy body weight, and that weight exists within the social context. And by that, you look at things like the fact that, you've got all these fast foods that are being shoved at you every minute of the day, and that, it's just very, very difficult to maintain a healthy lifestyle, a healthy weight in this kind of a lifestyle and so forth. And we know that, weight loss is it's not just, people think it's simple, but it's really not, because there's so many components that can drive excess weight. It can be something simple like you just bad eating habits that were passed on from your parents. And it could be things that are buried from your childhood where you had traumas and so forth. And we're going to talk about some of those kind of things there. Right. So one of the basic things for the audience, last time we talked a lot about all the different programs and so forth that are out there to try to address this system. So let's talk for a moment about those. We have things like people simply count calories. We have things that like Weight Watchers. Which are helpful programs and so forth. They do it with points instead of calories, and so forth. And then we have the Nutrisystem and Jenny Craig, okay? And so prepackaged foods and so forth. And they also have some support they provide. And then you have the one, and I don't know if we talked about this one, is the 5-2 fast diet. And fast not meaning quick. Right. Fast meaning you don't eat much. Right. And so you restrict your calories 2 days a week, men 600 calories, women 500 calories, and then the other 5 days a week you eat what you want, is what I understand. Okay. Then you've got things like liposuction, where you go in and you actually suck the fat out, and so forth. And then we can talk about things where they prescribe certain foods, like Atkins, heavily towards proteins and this and that. And I think you mentioned the paleo diet.
Paleo diet, which is a kind of a variation of that type of idea: high fats, low or no carbohydrates, high proteins. Right. And then of course, there are of course many diet pills. Right. Which work in different ways. And then we also talked about the surgical options: gastric band, lap band surgery. Right. So they're an enormous. I mean, it would be reasonable to say there is an industry. A
multi-billion-dollar industry, yeah. Yep. And the thing about it is, are these things successful? And by and large, I'm sure if you look at all the data, the answer is yes, they are successful at helping people lose weight. The issue is the weight comes back. Right. And there's a lot of reasons for that. You're really pushing a boulder uphill on this one, all the time with the societal influences. You've got friends and family who, hey, eat, have this, and so forth. And the thing about a lot of these is it's very restrictive. It takes on a role of what you can't have, right. And we're going to talk about how our program differs with that and so forth. But, and so that's the main problem is you can lose the weight, but you can't keep it off.
I think one of the most surprising things that occurred to me a few years ago, as far as this was concerned, was when I worked with somebody, and they didn't come to me for diet or anything at all. They came to me actually for a completely different reason, for pain as the result of a very serious car accident. And right. And we got talking, and she just said in passing, well, of course, I'd like to. I've been steadily gaining weight and I'd like to lose some weight. Right. And I just let it go, and then we continued talking, and I think I just mentioned in passing lap band or surgery, gastric band, and she said, oh yeah, I've had that. And I was shocked, and I said, I'm sorry, you said? She said, oh yeah, I was actually one of the first people in Connecticut to have that surgery. Mm-hmm. And I and she said, and I actually worked for 5 years in the surgeon's office as as an assistant, and part of what I did was to run support programs for people who had had the surgery.
Right.
And again, being sort of naive and perhaps a bit ignorant, I said, what do you mean by support programs? And she described that, there's a lot of problems with some of the surgery. But one of the biggest problems was that people at a certain point begin to put on weight.
Right.
And she was steadily putting on weight, and I was flabbergasted. And then I realised that, of course, the subconscious mind, as we talk about from our model, which controls the body, if it feels that it wants to put on weight, it's going to find a way to do it.
Right.
It's going to change physiology. It's going to change absorption rates.
Right.
It's going to change speed of metabolism.
It's going to change your hunger level so that you are, almost forced to eat more because you can't handle the hunger.
And so this really, really, really struck me, because in a sense, a lap band or gastric band surgery is almost the most extreme form of trying to control physically by literally shrinking the size of the capacity of the stomach. You literally cannot, one would think, eat more, but yet the body and mind working together finds a way to put that weight on. Right. And that was a strong demonstration. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit in relation to what we do.
Right. So one of the things, and I just want to emphasize that, because that is so true. It's not just our opinion about the subconscious and so forth. They've found when you, through studies, when you restrict your calories enough, your body thinks, okay, I'm in a starvation mode. There's famine going on, and your metabolism will decrease. Right. And I've actually even seen it with myself when I used to try that. Right, I would restrict calories, and all of a sudden my weight would plateau, and then sometimes I would add some more calories, and then the weight would drop again. Right. And it's because then my body was going, oh, okay, there's no famine. Right. And so forth. So it really does change your metabolism and so forth.
I mean, again, it comes back to our very, very basic assertion, which again is quite widely accepted these days, which is that we're not a body and a mind. It's part of the same unit. We are a body within a mind, right? Or a mind surrounded by body, however you want to put it. But they're a unit that acts cohesively, right? And there's communication. It's intelligence.
And one of the things about that too is the fact is that with some of these restrictive diets, okay. You're actually sending the wrong messages to your subconscious, and we're going to talk about what the right messages are and so forth. But it actually, in a way, sends the wrong message to the subconscious, which really controls all this. Right. So it's in that way they're actually counterproductive. Yes. And they typically have found over and over again that a lot of times people lose the weight, when they regain, it's even more. Right. And even when we look at our a person that you're probably folks sick of hearing me mention, Dave Ellman. Right. He talks in his book, written in 1962. Just got dark in here. Yeah, we just lost one of the lights. Yeah. Lost the light. In 1962, where he's talking about the fact that what would typically happen is he would put people, a doctor would come along to him because he taught doctors and dentists, and put somebody on what he called a hypno diet, and they would lose weight. And about a year later, they'd come back. Right. And the weight it was right back to where it was. Right. Or close to that. Right. And he realised, and he recommended to the doctors, that unless you address the underlying reasons why that's occurring, that tends to happen. And so. Right. Let's talk for a second about, so what is the role of hypnosis in weight loss and diets and so forth. Right. And just to kind of throw it out there, because some people have come to us and asked, to help with losing weight. Mm-hmm. But some of the typical things we've heard is, well, can you make me stick to a diet? Right. Can you make me eat healthy? Right. A real typical one. Please make me hate, and then fill in the blank. Right. Chocolate, fatty foods, or whatever it is. Fast food, or whatever it might be. Exactly. Make me control myself. And if you look at all those statements, those are all make me statements. Yes, they are. And make me do this and that. And that actually builds upon one of the myths of hypnosis.
Right.
Is that, that we can control you.
Right.
And they assume that we can control them, and so therefore we can make them stick to a diet.
Right, and so it comes back, you're absolutely correct, and I agree, it comes back to this concept of mind control.
Right.
Please, Mr. Hypnotist, control my mind so that I don't do this, that and the other. Please, Mr. Hypnotist, alleviate me from the responsibility of having to do anything, but just click the fingers and make it happen.
Well, that's exactly true, and I know recently you had a client that came in, and I don't think it wasn't necessarily weight, but it's the same idea, is that he just thought he'd come in and it was all you.
Right.
You'll do the work.
Right.
And fix him.
Right.
And he didn't want to do any of the work.
Right, and when his test of hypnosis in his mind was how far he was being controlled.
Right.
And he didn't feel that he was being sufficiently controlled, and therefore it can't be correct. It can't be working.
Right.
And when and you've heard on the show, folks, many times how we describe what the hypnotic process is, that it's a willing state,
right.
We guide people into it, that it's not a process of one person controlling another. But this idea was so fixed in his mind, and everything was judged and tested against it.
Right.
Even to the extent that Bill and I, with this particular client, demonstrated hypnosis on each other.
Right.
So he had the opportunity to witness hypnosis between each other, and we showed him what it was, and
right.
he thought, yeah, but that's what it feels like. That's what it's supposed to be.
Right. I know it's a very strange thing.
So when it comes to dietary things, so let's expand that a little bit. So let's first of all talk just as a subcategory of what I call the desire to create food aversions.
That's a very good one,
right.
An important one,
right.
Because some hypnotists do this.
Or attempt to.
Right.
And the first thing that occurs is usually an attempt to create an aversion to a food either doesn't work at all or works temporarily.
Right.
And it's a very, very common theme. The basic idea is that you link some food to, and this is done in smoking cessation sometimes, you link some food to a bad feeling.
Right.
Maybe something very visceral, the sense of feeling ill or vomiting or a very unpleasant smell or feeling
right.
or sensation. And the idea is that if you link those sufficiently strongly, the sight experience of that will be so repulsive to you that you won't go near it.
Right.
So there are two essential problems with this. The first problem, very simply, is that contrary to popular belief, even put about by hypnosis practitioners, it usually doesn't work.
Right.
It works for very, very short periods
temporarily.
of time. Yeah, because
right.
the subconscious mind is just not going to accept those suggestions for long periods of time.
Right.
That's the first thing. The second thing is, even where it does work for a longer period of time, then we have this process of attempting to use hypnosis to stimulate very, very negative emotions in the mind.
Right.
And to stimulate a sense, even though it's not actually true, but the belief that one is out of control. One was previously out of control because one couldn't help but eat certain things,
mm-hmm.
and now one is also out of control by not being able to eat certain things.
Right.
And it feeds into the same basic concept. It's also, I feel, on a basic level, rather cruel. It's cruel to create this, even attempt to create it in people's minds,
right.
and to create those links.
Right.
I believe it's very bad for people from the hypnotic sense. It's bad psychologically,
yep.
It's bad emotionally, and it's one of those arguments, the ends justifies the means types
right.
of argument.
Right.
And so one of the things that we want our clients to feel always is that their level of control in anything that we do is increasing, not decreasing. The very point that we're making very often is if you feel compelled to perform an action or to follow certain behaviours or feel as if you are governed by certain ideas, these ideas are in control. That is the hypnosis. You are being controlled. It's by your own mind.
Right.
Our job is to try and return control to you, not substitute one slave master for another.
Right.
That's not the idea.
Right.
We're looking for freedom and awareness and happiness and contentment.
Right.
And so the very notion of aversions is antithetical to everything that we're attempting to do.
Yeah, our whole program is based on getting at the real issues behind,
right.
that are driving those behaviors, right. and we're going to talk about a specific case that you've had recently.
Right.
You get to those things that are driving the behavior, and you help the person work those and release those issues, and then the behaviors just come of their own.
And so then now we've talked about aversion, let's talk to something that seems related and something that I used to do, which is that basically you use hypnosis to support a conscious mind dietary program,
Right.
whatever the diet is of choice.
Right.
And at one stage I would say to my clients, well, you pick the diet that you want to be on and I'll help you support it emotionally and mentally with hypnosis.
Right.
And you mentioned the 5-2-2 diet. That's where you spend, as I remember that diet, called the fast diet, spend 2 days a week on a very calorie restricted eating program where you have 2 meals usually, in total not more than 500 calories for women and 600 calories for men, a very small amount, so it's like fasting. And there is very good research behind this diet. It's not an accident, it's well researched, and there are certain dietary benefits to it and physiological benefits, there's, to fasting.
Right.
I would recommend this diet and use hypnosis to support this diet because I believed it had other good functions, but I subsequently moved away from that view. So hypnosis can always be used to support a diet if that's what you're choosing to do, and that is one complete path. And our hero Dave Ellman, that is one of the ways in which he used hypnosis.
Right.
He basically, once he believed he got to the root of why people were putting on weight, they still had to lose weight. So as he put it, he would hand them over to, or hand them back as it were, to their doctors, who would prescribe a certain diet until they lost weight. And that seemed to make a great deal of sense in his mind, and to many does make sense. But we believe that we got something that's a little more sophisticated and in many ways more practical than that, for the reasons that we're going to talk about.
Right, right.
So
yeah, I mean, there's some very famous hypnotists and that are lead these large group sessions and so forth, and have helped people lose a lot of weight.
Yes.
And they've used aversion. I mean, one was even envisioning a piece of chocolate covered in hair, and things like this. And yeah, they can help people lose weight. But again, if you don't get at the problem that is behind it, that's driving it, then it's just going to come back on.
So in trying to select a program out there, folks, one of the things that's significant about these types of programs is that they tend to be a program where you attend for a day or 2 days or 3 days.
Right.
That's one of their characteristics. They tend to be programs where it's recommended that you follow a particular type of diet.
Right.
So for example, if you follow an Atkins type, maybe paleo diet, which creates a ketogenic state in the body, then almost invariably, if you look in a period of a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you will very often lose spectacular amounts of weight.
Right.
Its purpose is to produce a certain metabolic change, and even Dr. Atkins, when he was alive, didn't believe that people should stick to an Atkins diet as it's been characterised now forever. It had a specific purpose and point.
Right.
And so what happens is that, again, if you take aversion, one famous hypnotist that you looked at, a very famous hypnotist, who's a lot of dietary recommendations and things I'd really like, but he comes from a stage background, and he could produce in a session on stage that temporary aversion, and it looks very spectacular, all of a sudden.
Right.
One of the famous stage hypnosis, not tricks, but things, is you might have somebody, and remember folks, in stage hypnosis, as we talked about, a lot of things can happen because you're on stage and because it's a show and everybody knows it's a temporary form of entertainment. But you can have somebody that is holding a cigarette, and you give them a suggestion that they literally can't pull it towards their mouth.
Right.
And then you turn to the audience and say, well, wouldn't that be good for stopping smoking? And it looks very convincing.
Right.
But it doesn't really get the job done. It produces a temporary effect.
Right.
And similarly, sticking to a diet for a short period of time. So what happens is people report after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, oh, I've lost 10 pounds, 15 pounds, whatever it might be. And you promote the program in that way. But what we're looking for is we're looking for a long-term, sustainable change that can become part of people's lives.
Right.
Not merely a short-term temporary effect. And by temporary, I mean anything that lasts a few weeks, because once you've lost the weight, then the question is, then what?
Right.
Then what happens?
Exactly.
Right. And
yeah.
so this is what our programs address.
Right. So let's talk about that. And I know you've had some recent changes in your thinking of approach and so forth. Because when we talked a few months ago about this, we said, well, there's some people, and I believe it's true, that they've gotten into bad habits. Maybe their parents had bad eating habits and so forth, and they're being bombarded with these messages about eating this fast food, and so they've gained weight from that. And with someone like that, a simple hypnotic regimen of direct suggestion could change that around, and it's all in a sense the positive direct suggestion, but it could work and it could stick and so forth. But then if you're talking people with a small amount of weight, that might be true of those 20 pounds or whatever. Then you go to the opposite end of the spectrum, and you've got people who are 100 pounds or more overweight, things like that. And I know what you've found in the past is a lot of times is that there's something driving that.
I've never found in practice that anybody that's more than, for a quick rule of thumb, 60 pounds overweight, let's say.
Right.
I've never found in those circumstances that there isn't an emotional cause.
Right.
It's, and again, if you take an even more extreme, people 100, 150, 200 pounds overweight, you don't just wake up one day and find yourself 200 pounds overweight as a result of sloppy eating.
Right.
Something is driving that behaviour.
Particularly because typically these people say, well, I don't want to be this heavy.
Right.
So if they consciously don't want to be that heavy,
Right.
they know all the dangers of being that heavy, the
Right.
medical dangers, health dangers, yet they say, I can't seem to change it. I can't seem to bring it around.
Now, just before we get into this, there's just one sidebar that I want to draw people to. It seems to me, and I think this is something that's agreed in the medical profession, that there can be quite a lot of undiagnosed hypothyroidism. That's where the thyroid's not functioning optimally, and the result of that is weight gain.
Right.
And if hypothyroidism is undiagnosed, and it's not always easy to diagnose hypothyroidism, the tendency has been these days to test only one marker, which is the T4 marker, not other markers. And so it depends which endocrinologist I think you go to or who you see and what their philosophy is. But what happens is if that is undiagnosed, and people can find themselves gaining weight, sometimes very rapidly, and quite honestly, it won't matter what you follow or what you do, short of starvation almost, you'll gain weight or you'll have a miserable time whether you follow what we do or what anybody else does.
Right.
And so one of the first things I ask people is, particularly if they've gained weight very rapidly over a short period of time, and that's never happened to them before, is have you had your thyroid function tested? Have you been there?
Right.
So even, and of course we ask other questions as well, but that's a very key one. So if folks, you find that you have experienced rapid weight gain, or you know somebody has, or even the weight's been gaining steadily but over a relatively short period of time, perhaps there's been a change in your thyroid capability and function, and it's worth having it checked.
Right. Right.
Because then when that is brought back into balance, and you need some form of medication to do that, either artificial thyroid supplements like Synthroid,
Right.
or Armour Thyroid, which is based upon pig thyroid, something to correct that function, then the sorts of things that we're doing or anybody else are doing will start to work. But without that, you'll have a miserable time.
Exactly.
So that's just a sidebar, folks, if you know somebody.
And that's, of course, that just points out too, when we have things that come in like that,
Yes.
the first thing we ask is, are you seeing a doctor?
Right, of course.
I mean, so to
Right.
make sure that if there's a really organic, problem that is being taken care of.
Absolutely.
Then after that, then we'll say, okay, then let's take a look
Right.
at it. And so, and one of the other things about it is, with extreme weight is, a lot of times, and you're going to tell a story here,
Right.
is that a lot of times people say, well, I know what it is. I started gaining weight here,
Right.
and that's what's causing it. Typically we find, but we've also find this with other problems we deal with, is typically whatever somebody comes in and says, I know what the problem is, it usually isn't.
No, and
usually something different.
And usually, and I'm going to give that example right now. So the background to that example is that Dave Ellman identified that once he identified the time, the event that was connected with why somebody started to gain weight in the first place, very often, once that was resolved and the insight was developed, then any program that they followed would then be successful and sustainable.
Right.
So let's pick up that idea a little bit by the illustration of a particular case that I'm going to describe, obviously without describing the name of the person, but just so that you know. So it's a recent case of mine, and it was out of hypnosis. I simply asked the question, when did you first start to gain weight? And this had happened around about the age of 8 or 9. From that time period on, this lady had always struggled with her weight, and it had become increasingly difficult. And she was one of the people that, you know, she joked with me when she first said, because she would tell me that she would wake up in the morning thinking about chocolate. She would go to bed thinking about chocolate. She would want the next time when she could satisfy that craving. And she almost begged me to take that away. And I said to her, by aversion, and I said to her that will change when we get to the essential cause as to why that's there.
Right.
That's a message coming up from the subconscious mind for a reason. It's linked to something. I don't know what it's linked to, but we can find out.
Right.
And so, as I spoke to her, I asked her, you know, when she started to gain weight, and she pointed out to that 8 to 9 year age. And the key event, as far as she could identify, was simply this, that at that age, she moved with her family about 20 miles away up the road. And when she moved to the new house, which was a nice new house, and a new neighbourhood, and a nice neighbourhood, but the problem was all of her childhood friends were left behind.
Right.
And although 20 miles, you know, to us as adults may not seem much, to a young child, that you might as well be moving to a different country or even a different planet.
Right.
Because everything had been left behind. And this seemed an extremely plausible reason. The emotions changed, the feelings changed, the upset and trauma began, and that's when she began gaining weight. So this looks very, very plausible. So what one would be tempted to do, if one completely bought into this, is to bring her back hypnotically to that time period and to find out what the feelings and emotions are.
Right.
But that's not exactly, folks, not exactly what happens when we use this process, because we're letting the subconscious mind guide us to what the key events are. And so, following the process, I brought this lady into deep trance. And indeed, initially we went back to that period of time when she moved and there were certain feelings and emotions. But continuing to stimulate those emotions, she immediately said, wait, there's something else. I'm finding myself in a different place entirely.
Because now you had, that's how we get back to it in our process, is that we follow the feeling, because things in the subconscious are linked by feelings.
Right.
Completely different events at different times may be linked and empowering each other because they have the same feeling or similar feelings.
Yes.
So you had her, you brought her back there, and what we do is, in any of these events, there's trapped emotion.
Right.
So, you know, what we do is we bring them back and we have them release that trapped emotion. And so my question is, when you took her back to that time period, or she went back to that time period, I should say, is did you release all the emotions there?
Not quite.
Okay.
Because what happened is that what was very clear, and what I asked her, there were certain key things that occurred. There were certain very upsetting events. I mean, one upsetting event for her at this moment, which again, and this is, you know, the nature of our process and where we have to be attentive. A very upsetting event occurred. She was leaving this house and the parents decided that they didn't have room or space for certain things. And which was quite surprising, because she told me previously that the house that they moved to was much bigger than their previous house. So I can't quite understand how that was, but anyway.
Right.
And they decided that a whole series of toys of the children had to be disposed of. And the way that they were going to be disposed of was to be burnt on a bonfire.
Yeah, okay.
Again, I don't quite understand the thinking behind it, because, I mean, these toys could have been given away or something like that. But and one of the things that was on the bonfire was I think it was a toy rabbit of hers or something. And she was extremely distressed to watch this object of her affection being consumed by the fire. And as the fire went out, she tried to go and find it in the ashes. That's how upset she was. Wow. And a very traumatic event for her, and had very strong emotions.
Yep.